Okay, so good morning, everyone. Today is the last day of our ATIL FTP. So we'll start session one with the speaker, Professor Yasha Hasija. Let me introduce all to her. She is currently working as Associate Professor in the Department of Biotechnology, as well as Associate Dean, Alumni Affairs at Delhi Technological University. She has published more than 50 research articles and review papers in national and international journals of high repute, 15 book chapters, and 32 conference papers. She is a member of various editorial boards of international journals, and she has made noteworthy contributions in the area of biotechnology, bioinformatics as an author and editor of notable books. She has earned recognition and received several prestigious awards, including the Government of India Department of Science and Technology Award for Nomenclature Award of the Human Genome Meeting 2010 held at Montpellier, France. She has also been awarded Commendable Research Award DTU for 3 consecutive years, 2018, 19, and 20, and the Premier Research Award DTU in 2021. She had been project investigator of several sponsored research projects from Government of India departments, including DST, CSIR, and DBT. Her broad areas of research includes genome informatics, integration of genome-scale data for systems biology, and machine learning applications in healthcare. So thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting my invitation. And I invite you to please deliver your session for the day. Please, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Roma, for that very generous introduction and also for inviting me to this session. And I would also like to congratulate IILM College CET, right, for having organized this ATIL sponsored FTP. And I think it will be very exciting to share something that I have been venturing into since almost 2 decades now. So for everybody else, I work in the area of bioinformatics at Delhi Technological University. And the topic that I've chosen for today is machine learning, a powerful tool for bioinformatics. So I think I would share my screen now. Is the screen visible, Dr. Roma?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So machine learning, which probably the users, the listeners by now know, that it is a field of artificial intelligence. And it is one area that has revolutionized the way people think, the way people learn, and the way, because, machine learning has occupied almost all areas that exist today, be it be finance, be it be healthcare, mobile apps, it is everywhere. And we've all been using machine learning without being actually able to recognize that we're using machine learning, right? So it's there in Alexa, it's there in Siri, it's there in OK Google, it's there in the maps that we use, it's there in social media apps, you name it, and AI is everywhere. Right, even when you talk about the Gmail reply prompter, or when you go for shopping at Amazon, so the recommendations that you get over there, they are all based upon what you have been venturing into, so the computer learns. So the list is really amazing. And so it's not really entertainment, but now it is also into healthcare and mankind, and that is something that we're going to cover today. So what is it that I'm going to cover today is here. I will discuss the various ways in which AI is impacting the healthcare domain. And so I'll begin by the session by understanding what exactly AI is, artificial intelligence is. Then we're going to move on and understand how AI is used in healthcare. And then we would learn about machine learning and its various types, and also the differences between AI and ML. So we often use these terms in conjunction with each other. So we'll understand the differences between the two. And lastly, we'll take a few examples from our laboratory as to how we've been using machine learning, especially with reference to age-related disorders. So let's move on and look at the first part of our presentation, which means what exactly AI is. So the simple definition of AI is this. It is the development of computer systems that are capable of performing tasks that normally require human intelligence. So it would involve tasks such as decision making, solving complex problems, and many others. And these are some of the advantages of artificial intelligence, which I've listed 4 of them here. It gives predictions with an increased level of accuracy, right? And it also helps us in decision-making processes. It helps solve complex problems. And lastly, it performs high-level computations that may take days for a human to solve, right? So that is the main advantage of using AI. And as I've been talking about the applications of artificial intelligence, so in this particular diagram, I've tried to briefly touch upon each of the applications. So the field of AI began somewhere in 1950s, and now it has been impacting, as I've said, various domains, including marketing, finance, the gaming industry, and even the musical arts and also robotics. Right, so clearly we all know that AI is impacting our lives on this planet. But what about the world beyond Earth? Not surprisingly, various companies, including NASA and also Google, they have implemented AI to search for new planets or exoplanets and other celestial bodies to search for life on other planets. So this is one of the recent applications of AI also in astronomical research. So so we have a varied range of applications of AI in I would say all domains that exist today. However, since we belong to biotechnology, since we belong to we venture into the applications of AI in healthcare. So and also AI has been impacting, has had a largest impact in the field of healthcare, from diagnosis to finding the genotype phenotype correlations, to predicting the disease risk, and so on. So with the help of big data, now we talk about big data in biology. So with the help of big data that has been generated from various experiments, be it be microarrays, be it be gene expression analysis, be it be genome-wide association studies, or NGS, the next generation sequencing technology. So the data, the splurge in data is huge. And therefore there is, so the data exists, now diagnosis of, the prediction of what can be residing within the data. So that has to be modeled, and that modeling is done using artificial intelligence. And that model may then subsequently help in disease diagnosis, in predictions of disease risks, the genotype phenotype correlations, and so much more. So what really has led to the sudden impact of AI in healthcare industry? As I said, so there is huge amount of data that's available. So the arrival of big data in biology, or the availability of high availability of medical data. Now, basically, we have so much of information, so much of medical data in the form of medical history. So whenever we go to any hospital, our history is written down. So basically, it is the availability of data, and implementing the artificial intelligence based on technologies such as deep learning, machine learning, which I would come to in my subsequent slides. So that implementation now has become much easier with the arrival of big data in biology, in healthcare. And another important reason that has led to the surge of AI in healthcare would be because now we are also able to develop complex algorithms. So one is the data, the other one is the algorithms. So there is no limitation per se with respect to data or the complex algorithms. Now, what happens is our human brain is not capable of handling high dimensional data, especially the medical data, because that is high dimensional in character, right? Because the data is so huge that we have around thousands and thousands of attributes. So for us to be able to process and analyze that data um, of such huge dimension, we need the help of machines, and therefore we need machine learning, we need deep learning, and we need neural networks, and so much more that we would be covering in this presentation. So I would end this slide by saying that with such an exponential growth in AI, machine learning is becoming the most trending field of the 21st century, and therefore the need to study AI and machine learning. Now, having said so much about machine learning, and also this bird's eye view on artificial intelligence, we shall now begin on the ABCs of machine learning, what it is. So we'll begin with probably this introduction to machine learning and its definition. Then subsequently, we would also come to the algorithms of machine learning one by one in detail. So I picked up about 5 to 6 algorithms for this particular FTP. So machine learning, it is the subset of artificial intelligence. So which means that this is one of the branches of of artificial intelligence, which provides the machines the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed. Now, this somehow awfully sounds like a human, right? So, so let us consider a small scenario to understand machine learning. Now, as a child, if we were to distinguish between fruits, or we were to distinguish between vegetables, or for that matter, if we were to distinguish between various people, we wouldn't know where to start with, since we are not aware of how different fruits or how different vegetables look. However, when we grow up, which basically means that we are learning with experience, right? So when we grow up, when we experience the data, we collect more information, and therefore we start developing the ability, the capability to distinguish between those various fruits or vegetables or people. So why are we able to make that distinction as we grow up? It is because we observe our surroundings, we gather more data, and most importantly, we learn from our past experiences, right? Just like here, in the picture that I've depicted here, the man here says to this robot that I can learn automatically from experiences. Can you? So the robot now says, I can also learn from the past data using machine learning. So exactly that. So machine is learning just like a human brain. And so what is required is the data, and what is required is the experience, right? So let us move ahead and take a look at various types of machine learning. So broadly, we have 3 types of machine learning: supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. So first of all, we have supervised learning. Supervised, as as the name suggests, it means that you're supervising, somebody is supervising, which means somebody is overseeing or and making sure that it is done in a certain way, right? So just like we all are teachers, right? And we guide the students, or we teach the students, and we ensure that this particular problem goes in a certain way, and that certain way has to be more or less correct, right? So exactly that is what we can correlate with what is supervised learning. So supervised learning is a method in which we teach the machine using the labeled data, right? So let us say if you want a computer to distinguish between the cats and other animals. And here I have named all the other animals as non-cats, right? So let us say I want a computer to learn to distinguish between cats and non-cats. As I said, the first thing that's required is a data. So I will treat the computer with various images of different types of cats. Now this becomes my label data, and this is also known as the training data. So larger is the data set, larger is the diversity in the data set, which means higher or more is the number of images of cats and non-cats, the better will be the learning. So after you have the data, then I said the next step is to create a model. So then you develop a model, which is nothing but a mathematical model. And that mathematical model, the aim or the goal is to distinguish between the unseen images of cats and non-cats, right? So that is supervised learning. So you're training the computer with the known images of cats and non-cats, and then based on that data, based upon that experience in data, you make the computer learn and then subsequently develop a mathematical model which would then be able to distinguish between the cats and the non-cats. So that's supervised learning. Next, we have unsupervised learning. So unsupervised, as the name suggests, so it means that the computer is acting without anyone's supervision or anyone's direction, right? So as I've written here, the machine is trained on without any guidance. So there is no guidance. Are of cats and non-cats, which means we're not giving the computer any label data or the training set. So what would the computer be able to do? So there is no guide and there is no mentor, and so machine has to figure out what resides within the data set. And it has probably to, it would either be able to cluster those images of cats or non-cats, or maybe it would be able to find the hidden patterns in order to make predictions about the output, right? So, so just like I took an example of a child in case of supervised algorithm, here I would take an example of an adult, right? So we do not need any guidance for our daily, day-to-day activities, right? So we figure out things without any supervision. So in this figure here, you can directly provide the computer with the images of animals without actually teaching it or telling it anything about cats and non-cats. So what it would be able to do is it would be able to cluster these animals into groups, and that clustering would be based upon similarities. And as this is given in the picture here, right? So it would only be able to cluster similar groups of cats versus non-cats, right? So this is referred to as clustering. And it does something else for you, which is association, which I would cover in my subsequent slides. Next, we have reinforcement learning. Now, reinforcement, it would mean that you're trying to establish or encourage a pattern or a behavior, right? So in reinforcement learning, an agent interacts with the environment by producing actions and discovers errors or rewards. Now, what does that mean? Now, I would explain it with another analogy here, and let us say that if you were dropped in an in an isolated island, for example. So what would you do? You would probably first panic because you would be unsure of what really to do, where would you get the food from, how would you live, how would you survive, so on and so forth, right? But after a while, when you have no option left, you will have to learn to adapt, right? So you must learn how to live in that island, adopt to the changing climates. You will have to learn to what to eat, what not to eat. So basically it is a hit and trial concept that you are new to a particular surrounding, and the only way to learn is the experience. And this is exactly what reinforcement learning is. Now, I have depicted this particular concept here with the help of this agent here, right? Now this agent, when it goes close to fire, it gets hurt. So there is a error that's happening. So it knows that it doesn't have to go here. So a negative penalty of 50 points is being imposed. Now next time, when the agent would, so next time, since a penalty has been imposed, negative penalty has been imposed, so the agent would avoid going closer to the fire and rather explore the other direction, which probably has, the tap water. So essentially, the agent is trying to explore the environment by taking different actions and transitioning from one state to another so as to gain maximum reward points. Idea is to minimize the penalty and gain the awards or the award points, right? And this is the way the agent is trained, and it gets ready to predict the new data that's presented to it, right? So these are the three types of machine learning. Now, based upon the next parameter is the types of problem. So what are the types of problems that are solved using supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning? So under supervised learning, we have basically two types of problems. We have a classification problem and we have the regression problem. Now, classification is about predicting a label or a class, whereas regression is about predicting a continuous quantity. Now, let us say you're going to predict the temperature, let us say you're trying to classify whether it's going to be hot or cold tomorrow. So for this kind of problem, what would we do? We would have to, assign our input data into different classes. So basically, we make use of different classification algorithms. On the other hand, regression is used to predict a continuous quantity, and therefore it may have indefinite number of possibilities. Now, for elaborating this further, if you have to predict the next day's temperature, right? So the temperature could be 46, 46.1, 46.2, 46.15, and so on and so forth. So the number of possibilities for temperature are limitless. So this prediction of temperature is a continuous variable, and therefore regression is a predictive analysis that's used to predict continuous variables. However, when you only classify your temperature into hot or cold, then it becomes a classification problem. Let me explain this to you with another example. Let us say we're trying to predict the price of a house, right? So for such problems, you would make use of regression problems because again, the price of the house is going to be a continuous variable. And then if you're trying to, divide your emails into spam and non-spam and so on. So that would account for a classification problem, right? Because then you are able to classify it into spam email or non-spam. So there is a definite number of events in which you are classifying it. Now coming on to unsupervised learning. This type of learning can be used to solve, the patterns within the data or finding the co-occurrences within the data. And so this again has two main, as I've also talked about this before, it can either discover the patterns within the data or finding the co-occurrences and so on. So association, as I've written here, which items should be put on sale together. So it is probably like a relationship between a bread and a jam, or maybe bread and butter. So people who tend to buy bread also would tend to buy a jam or a butter. So basically, it's about finding the association between items that frequently co-occur or items that are similar to each other. So this becomes a part of a classification problem. And similarly, in unsupervised, the association problem, the other type of unsupervised learning would be clustering. So it would involve grouping alike together. And example I had taken in my previous slide also. Another example I've taken here. Here, let us say I'm clustering the fishes together, and clustering the birds together, or maybe clustering the potential buyers into different categories based upon their interests. So this would form an unsupervised association problem. And lastly, you have reinforcement learning. Now, this type of learning is relatively very different. Here, as I said, the robot does not know anything about the surrounding. After it performs certain actions, it has to explore about the world. But remember, the world it sees depends upon, basically the data that is given to it. So the world that it sees depends on whether it chooses, based on that, it would choose its direction, whether it go right or left or forward or backward and so on and so forth. So the robo is known as the agent, and the surrounding is known as the environment. So for each action it takes, it would receive a reward or might get a punishment. And as is shown in this figure, so which is the best move? The best move that's decided in this game of chess would be the reinforcement learning, right? So next is the type of data. So next, the type of data that's used to train a machine. And again, when it comes to supervised learning, the machine is set with a label set of input and output data in the training phase itself, right? We had shown it that these are the cats and non-cats. We had shown it that these are the different types of fruits in my previous example. So the training is done with the help of label data in the training phase itself, right? Which means that in supervised learning, the machine already knows the output of the algorithm before it starts working on it, which means the machine knows that it has to predict the cats and non-cats, it has to predict the apples and non-apples, and so on. So, model is, and what happens in unsupervised learning? The machine is only given the input data, and which is unlabeled. So we do not tell the machine where to go. It has to find associations or clustering based upon the data. So here in this particular example, in supervised learning, we are telling the model that these are the apples, and we are trying to predict the image of this particular apple here, that whether this is an apple or not. So the model is thus generated, and the model says that yes, this is an apple. However, in unsupervised learning, there is no labeling that's given per se that these are apples or bananas or red apples or anything. It would just, the computer would just learn based upon the experience, and then it would classify the images that look alike. However, it would not be able to label them as bananas or red apples or maroon apples, because it does not have that training, right? So that's unsupervised learning. Now coming on to reinforcement learning, as I've been saying, that there is no predefined data whatsoever. So the actions are taken by the agent based upon the penalties and the rewards. And an example of this that I've given here is probably the self-driving cars, or maybe deciding the best lane that maximizes the speed of the car. So basically the computer, the motor is going to learn traversing the path of the self-driving car based upon what it encounters during the way. So that is reinforcement learning. Next parameter is the training. So in supervised learning, as I've been saying, the teacher is present. So the training phase is very well defined, and it's very, very explicit. In unsupervised learning, it is a self-learner. Why? Because the machine is not given any input. It has to figure out the output on its own. So it's a self-learner. And in reinforcement learning, so the whole process of training and testing goes hand in hand with each other. So there is no predefined data that's given to the machine. It has to learn everything on its own. And how does it do? It does by exploring and collecting the data, and thereby seeking rewards in a continuous manner. The rewards or punishments are sought in a continuous manner. So that's a continuous process of learning. Next is the aim. So you will have to know where to apply what, in what kind of a problem you have to apply which kind of a algorithm. So the main or the end goal of any supervised learning algorithm is to predict an outcome or to forecast an outcome. Now, you would say that this is a goal of all machine learning types, right? Yeah, but the whole supervised learning process is built in a way that it can directly, predict a particular outcome. Why? Because it has a very, very well-defined training phase. However, unsupervised learning is about it finds the underlying patterns, or I would say it is about discovering patterns and extracting useful insights, right? Coming on to reinforcement learning, and the agent is a lot like a rat in this picture. So just like initially the rat is clueless about the world initially, it has no idea about the environment, right? So, but when it is, exposed to that particular environment, it learns from the mistakes, and basically it learns from the experience, and thereby it chooses an action or the correct path, which means left, right, forward, backward. It has to go towards the cheese, right? So it will figure out the direction on its own. And so that's a continuous process of learning and achieving rewards or punishments, right? Next is the approach and the feedback. Now, when it comes to supervised learning, it is very simple. And all that a supervised algorithm has to do is to map the labeled output of known out. It has to map the labeled input to known output and get feedbacks for errors, right? However, in unsupervised learning, the algorithm has to find patterns or trends within the data. And we have to keep this in mind that the data here is unlabeled. So it has to keep exploring the data until it reaches the output. However, in reinforcement learning, it is a trial and error method. So the agent has to try to figure out all the possible actions. It has to learn about the environment in order to get the maximum reward points. So the feedback here is in the form of punishments from the environment, right? So, this game, I don't know if many of you are sure of this game, Subway Surfers, right? My kids keep playing this every now and then. So there again, what you're basically trying to get is those extra points. But when you fail, you have to go back and, to the same point and then keep trying it again and again. So that is reinforcement learning. Now, these are some of the popular algorithms of supervised learning, and many of them I would be covering in this presentation. Linear regression, logistic regression, support vector machines, decision trees, random forest, neural networks, these are some types of supervised learning algorithms. And unsupervised learning, so we have k-means, a priori, and c-means, right? So k-means and c-means are basically used for clustering analysis, and the algorithms like a priori, and this is used for association rule mining in order to deal with different association problems. And reinforcement learning, this is being explored only recently, and few algorithms. These include Q-learning, SARSA. SARSA is also known as state action reward state action algorithm, right? So SARSA. So these are the two algorithms that are used in reinforcement learning. And lastly, the applications. So I have given you one example of email filtering before also, right? So if filtering your emails based upon spam versus ham, or also in business sector for forecasting the sales and risks and so on and so forth. So all these applications, we would be using supervised learning. Now coming on to unsupervised learning. So the recommendations that you see when you shop online or when you buy a book on Amazon, try to get a list of recommendations. Now all that is based upon unsupervised learning. Why? Because it's clustering, it's that all that association is happening because it's trying to predict what is it that you would be interested in shopping next. Maybe it would be another kind of book or something. So all this is unsupervised learning. Also, other applications would be anomaly detection, for example, credit card fraud detection, and so on and so forth. And lastly, in self-driving cars, in gaming boards, and so on. So there's this game called Kinect. If some of you must have played it or used it. Also, there's this game called AlphaGo game. So in all these gaming robots, and this reinforcement learning is made use of. And these were all the types in which I thought I would be able to distinguish between the supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. And now this was about all of that. And now from here in the next few slides, as I said, I would be taking up one algorithm, a few of the algorithms of supervised and unsupervised, and explain to you how those actually work. So linear regression, as I said, was one of the types of supervised learning algorithm. And it is used for the prediction of continuous variables, right? Such as sales or age or, the price or the salary, the weather, and so on and so forth. So it would form a sort of a regression problem, right? So therefore, it is a linear regression. It is not a classification problem because you're not, classifying discrete sets. However, you are predicting a continuous variable. Now, as the name suggests, we know why regression. Now we have to see why linear. Linear is linear because it is represented by a linear equation in which one variable is independent, right? Y equal to mx plus c is a classical linear equation. So one is a independent variable, one is a linear variable, and x, so which means y equal to mx plus c, x becomes the independent variable, y is the dependent variable, and m is a slope. And c, of course, is the intercept, right? So this is a classical linear regression problem. So linear regression's task is to find the optimal values of M and C based upon the X and Y data points, right? So since it is a supervised learning algorithm, X and Y would already be given to you. So you have to optimize your M and C and then finally predict the value of Y based upon the M and Cs that you have predicted. So the optimal line should pass through the data points that best expresses the relationship between your data points, right? The one that best fits the data points is your best classification, best regression line, right? So next is the linear regression. So once you've seen the linear regression, so next, when you have to classify your behavior based upon, so we have seen linear regression wherein we were predicting a continuous value. In logistic regression, it is used to predict the relationship between the predictors and a predicted variable, right? So basically, you're trying to, again, figure out the relation between y and x. So this particular curve, this is also a sigmoidal curve, as we can see. This is a typical growth curve that we used to see for a bacterial, growth. So this is also known as Richard's curve, and this is basically an extension of the classical logistic or sigmoidal functions, and it allows for a more flexible S-curve shapes. Now here, since this is a classification problem, the output would always be either 0 or 1, right? So let us say if you're trying to predict a tumor, right? Tumor would either be benign or malignant. Let us say you're assigning it as malign or benign or malignant. So you would label benign as 0 and malignant as 1, since this is a classification problem. And then the sigmoidal function, it will give values ranging from 0 to 1. So then we will have to set a threshold to get only the values as 0 or 1. And of course, intuitively, the most common threshold is 0.5. So if a value of less than 0.5 is assigned, then it is predicted as 0 or benign. And if a value of 1 or more than 0.5 is assigned, then it is classified as 1 class or the malignant class. And next is the KNN, or the K nearest neighbors. So this is best classified using this proverb, English proverb, which means, which says that a man is known by the company he keeps, right? This proverb is the simplest analogy for this KNN algorithm, or the K nearest neighbor algorithm. Now let me elaborate this with an example. Now, while diagnosing a new case, a doctor tries to find the cases with similar symptoms from the past, right? These symptoms may be assumed as features, and diagnoses are the labels, or let us say the treatments are the labels for this particular problem. Now, this model representation is nothing but a sorted, lowest to highest or highest to lowest. So it is a sorted training data set, and no special learning is required. So it's a very simple algorithm. So let's look at this figure on the right. So we have data points for two groups that are denoted by blues and yellows here, right? So if we choose a value of k, right, and create a new instance for prediction, so what would happen is the model will check, since the value of k we have set as 3, it will check the 3 nearest data points and assign the new data point to the majority nearest classes, right? So if k is 3 here, for this particular plus sign here, if I have to predict the value of plus here, so I would take the 3 closest neighbors here. 2 of them are yellow and 1 of them is blue. So my label for this particular plus will come out to be a yellow circle, right? And this distance of how are these nearest neighbors identified? These are identified by using any distance measure, and the most commonly used distance measure is the Euclidean distance, right? And this Euclidean distance is given by this formula here, which is xj minus xi square plus yj minus yi square whole square root, right? And we can see, so therefore choosing the right value of k would be a very important factor for deciding the behavior of the model. So what would happen is, if a very low value of k is chosen, it may compromise on the accuracy of the model, because the noise may have a significant impact on the model. However, if you choose very high values of k, then it would become computationally very, very intensive. And therefore, a trade-off between the k value and the accuracy has to be considered when you have to decide a particular value of k. Now, next are the decision trees. So I'm only giving a bird's eye view because it would take me 1.5 hours to cover one algorithm in detail. So I'm just giving a glance of all the algorithms, some of the algorithms that of supervised and unsupervised, so that if you get interested, you can always go back to them and revise them. And a whole lot of information is anyway available on the internet these days. So decision trees. These decision trees and random forest, both of these are supervised learning algorithms, which are used for problems of both regression and classification. Now, as the name suggests, random forest, right? So forest, these are essentially an assembly of decision trees, right? So a decision tree is based on the whole data set, while a random forest randomly select, so as the name suggests, it would randomly select observations and features to create several decision trees and then averages the results. So basically, decision trees work as a flow chart or a chain of decisions for achieving a particular or a specific goal. And each of the node is a test condition and branches are their outcome, right? So you have a root node from where we start, and then you make a number of decisions based upon those decision nodes. And finally, you make decisions, and those decisions are finally reflected in the leaf nodes, right? So how do decision trees train? So a tree is learned by splitting the source set into subsets based upon the attribute value set. And the process is repeated on each derived subset in a recursive manner called as recursive partitioning. So basically, recursive partitioning is a statistical method, and it is used for multivariable analysis. Now it is called as recursive. Why? Because the subpopulation is again split into an indefinite number of times until a specific stopping criteria is reached. And then there are several algorithms that are used for this purpose, and it was not possible for me to cover the algorithms in detail. However, just for all of you to know that ID3 algorithm is one very well-known algorithm for recursive partitioning. So here I have explained the principle of partitioning with this example figure. Now let us say we have some data points of these two groups. These are my blue and yellow. And we have two features, x1 and x2. So x1 is on my x-axis and x2 is on my y-axis. And these features, x1 and x2, describe these data points. So what would happen? My first step is here, yes. So my first step is to find the condition of the root node. So for the root node, we have to build a condition or a test through which we can separate the maximum data points of the groups, right? That's the whole idea. So in step 1, we select the condition x2 more than 20. Please look at the step 1 on my left-hand side figure. If I choose my condition as x2 more than 20, what would happen is we can see that the data points above and below the value of 20. So this x2 is separating the entire population with minimum impurities, right? So this is the value of x that's chosen with minimum impurities. That means that you have a similar ratio of that. The ratio of similar groups and non-similar groups is high, right? Now this root node, which is this Rn is the root node that I've represented here. It has two branches. One is for yes, the other one is for no, right? So if the condition is met, which means if it is a true condition, it is a yes, while if it is a false condition, it is a no. Now, in the second step, here in this figure below, in the step 2, we repeat the same process for the subpopulations. Now, what would happen? We see that the data points can be subdivided for groups. When you apply this x1 more than 25 and x1 more than 15, right? So that's my step 2. So basically, your next condition is applied to x2. After x2, it is applied to x1, and then it says whether your x1 is more than 25 or more than 15. So here, if it is more than 25, then again, so if it is more than 25 here, you again have a mixed set. So a decision is not yet reached for this x1 more than 25. However, a decision is reached if the value is less than 25. So this is a terminal node here or the leaf node here. So it turns out to be a blue here. Now, similarly, if x1 is more than 15, here again, it gives me a value of pure nodes of yellows and blues. So only mixed set now left is here, wherein you had x1 more than 25 and x2 more than 20. So my third recursion would be applied at step 3, and wherein you would apply this particular condition also here, this particular dotted line, wherein your x2 takes this value of 30. And therefore, this is a recursive process wherein you keep applying different conditions till you get pure instances or pure classification. Right, so this is the main idea behind the decision tree algorithms. Next up is the support vector machine, or the SVM. These are another class of supervised machine learning algorithms, and these are particularly very well used in classification problems, although sometimes they're also used for regression problems. And these again are linear classifiers because they make linear decision boundaries. Now, the objective is to find a hyperplane in an n-dimensional space, where n is the number of features that distinctly classifies the data points. Now, it is very pertinent for me to mention here that hyperplane is a flat decision boundary, and the dimensions are n-1 for any n-dimensional data set, which means that if you have a 2D data, it will be a line. If you have a 3D data, it will be a plane, and so on and so forth. So the number of dimensions of the hyperplane are n-1, where n is the number of dimensions of the data set. Now, for applying the SVM, the data should be linearly classifiable, as I've said. So again, another concept that must be remembered here, which is also given in the this top picture on the right, is SVMs only classify linearly separable data. But however, not all data sets in the real world may be linearly classifiable. So for what happens is there a kernel trick is applied, which means that this kernel trick, it aims to map the lower dimensional data into a higher dimensional data, which then becomes linearly separable. So these kernel functions are nothing but general functions that take your data to a higher dimensional space, wherein the data then becomes linearly separable. And one of the most commonly used function is the radial basis function, which is used for this purpose. And I'm not getting into the details of all those functions. And why is it known as support vector? Because support vectors here, as we can see in this figure here on the right below, these are the data points that are closest to the hyperplane. And therefore, the position of those support vectors would influence the position of the hyperplane and also the orientation of the hyperplane or the angle of the hyperplane, right? So in this picture below on the left, as we can see, there are several lines that may separate these two orange and blue data points, right? So you do not know which one to be used. How is that determined? So the hyperplane which is finally selected should be as far as possible from both the data sets. Right. So in this picture on the right, these orange data points with red margins, right? And these blue data points with these pink margins, right? These are my support vectors, right? And you have to see your hyperplane is selected such that it has maximum distance from the margins or from the support vectors, and therefore these are also known as support vector machines. Next is the artificial neural networks, or ANNs, also known as the neural nets. Now, as the name suggests, you are trying to mimic the neural networks or the neurons that make up a human brain, right? And it's been almost 60 years or 6 decades of research into neural networks. And since then, they have found applications in various fields. And most commonly used application is in the field of image processing or text recognition, speech recognition, or medical diagnosis. Many such applications are there for artificial neural networks. Now here, the architecture of a simple neural network is given in this particular figure, and it has an input layer, it has the hidden layer, and it has this hidden layer can be n number of layers. And if the number of hidden layers increase, then we get into a specialized type of ANNs, which is known as deep learning, right? And finally, you have the output layer, right? So these are the three main layers. And the neurons typically consist of inputs, right? So these x1, x2 are my inputs here in this figure. My weights, w1, w2 are my weights. b1, the b's are the biases. Z is the activation function, right? And then you finally apply the output, right? So here, so you have the x1 and x2. So my output would be w1 z1 plus w1 x1 plus w2 x2 plus the bias, right? And you apply the activation function, and after, so this activation function could be any of these which are given here. It could be sigmoidal, it could be tanh, it could be ReLU, and finally you get the output, right? So this is how this ReLU, by the way, is also known as the rectified linear unit, and it gives a value of 0 for negative values and a value of 1 for positive values. And this tanh function will give output ranging from -1 to 1, as is given here. And sigmoidal functions will return a value of 0 to 1 for any value of z, right? So this is typically used in the output layer of a deep neural network. So this is how a neural network basically works. Now, these were some of the supervised learning algorithms. I've given you just a bird's eye view because, as I said, if I get into the details, it is in my courses, it is a 1.5 hours class to cover a simple algorithm, one single algorithm. So here, finally, I thought I would also touch upon one of the unsupervised learning algorithm, because you should also know how these work. So here, as I've been saying, that no label is provided. So they only find hidden patterns that reside within the data sets, and they form clustering or they form association based upon the similarities within the data sets, and placing the objects that are more similar to each other in one group versus the other objects which are more similar to each other, and such groups of objects are also called as clusters. And this k-means clustering is one of the most popular unsupervised learning algorithm. And this k-means clustering, this follows a simple iterative rule to classify the unlabeled data set or to form clusters. And this has a wide range of applications. And again, as you would see when you use your microarrays. So basically in gene expression data, in drug repurposing that we do, in all those cases, the unsupervised clustering is made use of. So what happens here? First, again, you have to find a value. You have to define a value of k, since the algorithm will cluster the data to those many number of categories. So therefore, assigning a value of k is very, very important, and it is based upon the domain knowledge. Now, after deciding this value of k, they are placed. So here what happens is, the points are placed randomly inside the data space, and these are referred to as centroids, right? So this is how a centroid is calculated. And let us say here, I have defined my two centroids here. Now the data points that are nearer to these randomly placed centroids are assigned to that particular cluster. Now, for example, here my red, and I have defined in my step 1, I have defined this red triangle and red star as my centroids. Now, what would happen is I would assign the points that are nearest to the centroid in step 2, which means that since all these points are closer to my triangle, these would be classified as triangle, and including these, and all of these here would be classified as my star. Now, what would happen is you would then take a margin and then move the centroid towards the mean of the cluster. So my mean of the cluster comes, so my centroid now moves from this particular triangle here to this particular triangle here, the red triangle. And similarly, my red star also moves from this particular position to this particular position in step 3 towards the mean of the cluster. And then again, you would assign the points that were nearest to the centroid here, right? So this is again an iterative process, and you keep on allocating the data that is nearest to the cluster. So this is the main concept of, and therefore this particular data set that we had here has been classified into 2 clusters based upon the distances between them, between the centroids of the clusters. Right, so these were the bird's eye view or the glances of some of the supervised and the unsupervised learning algorithms. Now coming on to few other terminologies, because unless I speak about them, I would not be able to, since I believe that most of you have understood, but then these terms keep confusing a lot of people. So I thought I would introduce another slide for this. So artificial intelligence, it is a very broad umbrella under which machine learning and deep learning come. And this is also evident in this diagram. And even deep learning, as I said, is a subset of machine learning, because I had also mentioned about it, that deep learning comes into play when the number of hidden layers becomes huge in ANNs, right? So while AI involves making intelligent machines and programs for, let's say, diagnostic purposes, machine learning is the ability of computers to learn without being explicitly programmed, right? And deep learning, as I said, is again a subset of machine learning, and it is based on deep artificial neural networks, or ANNs, right? So these were the main 3 terminologies that we often come across these days. Now coming on to the last portion of my talk here, wherein so as I said, we have been tremendously exploiting machine learning applications in our laboratory for almost 10-15 years now. So today I picked up as a case study age-related disorders, since I believe that aging interests every one of us, right? Because obviously nobody really wants to age. But at the same time, we also know that aging is inevitable. We all have to go through it. And consequence of aging is both physiological as well as psychological. Why? Because it results in concurrent diseases like high blood pressure, diabetes, hypertension, depression, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, you name it. So all these changes, they severely impact a person's state of well-being, as well as severely restrict the ability to contribute to the society in terms of productivity as well as general usefulness. So if this is not addressed, a large reservoir of human talent in probably, let's say, the age group of 70 to 80, we may become unproductive. And therefore, and also to add to it, the life expectancy is increasing, and at a much faster pace than what the statisticians call a healthy life expectancy. Which means what? That though we are living longer, we are living longer in poor health, right? And this graph here, it illustrates how the occurrence rates of diseases, they start increasing as we start to age, with the effects clearly visible after the age of 40. Now, since a person's genetic makeup plays a crucial role in susceptibility to various age-related disorders, or ARDs as I call them, the primary focus of our lab is on the computational analysis of genetic factors that affect the susceptibility to all these ARDs. So almost a decade back, when we started working on this problem, we started looking for public domain databases that contained information on age-related, we wanted to look for variations that were associated with ARDs. And what we found was, although the information was available, it was all scattered, which meant what? That there was not one single resource that hosted information on all the genetics of all age-related disorders at one single place. Though there were, specialized databases available, such as ALS gene for Alzheimer's or SCID gene for schizophrenia, but there was not one single resource that contained information on all ARDs. So our first step was to perform an exhaustive literature survey, and this was, which was also manually curated to compile a list of all age-related disorders, and we classified them into major disease classes. So basically, we ventured for all the age-related disorders, and we could pick up 51 ARDs, and then we classified them or categorized them into these 12 major disease categories, which are mentioned here. These were bone, cancer, cardiovascular, and so on, right? And then we also picked up the public databases wherein we could fetch, the genetic information on all these 51 disorders. And then we performed, we created this database called as DBARD. DBARD is database of aging and age-related disorders, and which contained information on age-related disorders as well as the variations or the single nucleotide polymorphisms with a statistical significance of less than 0.5, and this p-value, which indicated the statistical significance, is also given in the database. And this study was published in Advances in Gerontology in 2014. So this is where we started with. And this database, DBARD, was then publicly hosted. It is a freely accessible user interactive database of the relationships of human SNPs and ARDs. And it is hosted at our lab website, genomeinformatics.dtu.ac.in/dbard. So basically all the databases and all the tools that we develop are all there at our lab website, genomeinformatics.dtu.ac.in, right? And this, each entry in DBARD, it contains information on all these parameters. It contains information on the SNPs, the associated disorder, the p-value. In addition to that, it has the literature reference, the geographical location, the information about the genes and their chromosomal location, the type and location of SNPs, the mutated and the original amino acid of the reference amino acid, and also if it is an amino acid change, the change in the protein location, the protein change, what is the location, what is the change in the amino acid. And this database was published in Journal of Biomedical Informatics in 2016. Now, this is how our lab website looks like. And here you would see that we have links to all these Android apps, the tools, and the databases we develop. And these are the databases that we've developed so far, of which if you click on this DBARD, you arrive here, and this is how it looks like. If you click on the query form, this is the main page of DBARD. And you can apply the filters, which means which is a class of age-related disorders that you're interested in. For example, if you're interested in a particular class of ARDs, you can select that particular class. Or in case you are interested in a particular disease, you can click that particular disease. Or if you are interested in searching by genes, you can enter the symbols of the individual gene or paste multiple symbols here. Similarly, you can paste the multiple SNPs or the RSIDs of SNPs here. And also you can click on the attributes, which means the attributes of the outputs that you are interested in looking at, which means you can click on ethnicity, the geographical location, the p-value, odds ratio, all of that as I mentioned in that slide before. And then you can, so here I clicked the class, the cardiovascular. So I would, arrive at all the diseases that are there in the cardiovascular disorders, along with the genes that are associated with those cardiovascular disorders, the SNP that has been shown to be associated with that particular disorder, along with the PubMed ID or the literature reference from where this information has been extracted. And these RSIDs and PMIDs are also hyperlinked to their respective pages. So if I click here on this particular RSID, I would arrive at that DB SNP page. And similarly, if I click here on my PMID, I would arrive at that literature reference. So if you want to go further and read further about it, you can always read about that particular paper. You need not search for paper because the link is already there, right? So our database hosts 3197 SNPs across 1 to 97 genes associated with 51 disorders under 12 classes, right? So next, since our database was developed, our next step was to click the attributes, so select the attributes or to develop a predictive tool, because that is what our main purpose was, right? So this, we developed this tool which is known as AGP. This is also known as age-related disorder gene prediction tool. So from here, the dbar that we constructed, we took the information of all these proteins that were hosted there in dbar from UniProt, and we created a positive and a negative data set. Since this is a label data set, I'm talking about supervised learning, right? And I also selected the features of those genes from which I thought could distinguish between those the ARD associated genes and the ARD non-associated genes. And then I developed a particular classifier, and and that classifier which best worked for my particular genes was a random forest classifier, rotation forest classifier, and my tool thus developed had a high level of accuracy and was again published in AGP, and it is again hosted in that my lab website in the tool. And we believe that our tool may have various biomedical applications in healthcare and also in personalized medicine. Now, since the time is running short, I would quickly browse through my next slides. And so AGP, so this I would skip. And since this is how my AGP looks like, I can again search by gene symbol or Antre ID or Swiss prot accession, and I can click on the attribute parameter group that I'm interested in looking at. I can click on the attribute to group 2 or 3 or 4. These are the attributes based upon on which my tool worked, right? So these are the parameters. And finally, my gene prediction looks like this. And this is the probability of association 0.832. And these are the various parameters that I had clicked. So this gives me the value of alanine, the serine in my amino acid, and so on and so forth. Now, this particular tool that I developed, AGP, was based upon the physicochemical properties of the proteins. However, we were also we got interested in looking at whether if I look at my protein-protein interaction properties, would I be able to develop a better tool? Because ultimately, it is not about a single protein in case of age-related disorders. It is an interaction of multiple proteins and multiple genes. So next, again, we developed this ARDNet. This was an open source tool for visualization of ARDs and related data. And this was published in BBA Proteins and Proteomics in 2017. And this is again hosted on a website, ARDNet index.html. And this is a tool that was based upon the interface properties of the proteins. And it was published in Soft Computing in 2019. And this again was found to have a better predictive value than AGP, which was based upon the physicochemical properties. And this tool, which was based upon the interaction interface parameters of proteins, interactive parameters of proteins. So this was found to have a high predictive value. So I would conclude by saying that the data from dbar, AGP, and ARD-PRED may be used to prioritize genes that may be associated with different ARDs. And to summarize my talk, I have this small illustration. So you have aging process, which we have seen is inevitable. So what we try to achieve is not aging, but because we are susceptible to various disorders, we try to achieve what we call as healthy aging. So basically from the ARDs, the age-related disorders, we look at the genes, we look at the SNPs or the genetic variations in those genes, and then we develop this databases, ARD gene SNP database, also known as DBAR. And then we look at various protein properties in a data-driven approach. We apply machine learning, and then we develop our AGP tool, also known as ARD gene prediction tool, which we hold applications in various domains, which we call as 3Ps: my prediction, prevention, and personalized medicine, right? Also referred to as 3Ps. So our purpose is to, by our prediction of all these tools and databases, is to achieve healthy aging with minimal suffering, right? And yes, so to read more about what I've discussed today, to read more about artificial intelligence and machine learning, so you can go through this book that has been edited by me recently, and this book gives a detailed account of the successful applications of AI in healthcare and also the challenges. And this has been published by Academic Press, which is of course an imprint of Elsevier. And there's this whole chapter on AI in this particular book, and which has applications, tremendous applications field of biomedical and clinical data science. And this is a list of my collaborators: Professor Vaising, Dr. Vinod Skaria, Dr. Ritushri Kukreti. These are all my PhD students and GRFs who have contributed to my work, and of course my ongoing students: Rajkumar, Devlina, Neha, Jayashree, Megha Kumari. So machine learning allows us to build software solutions that exceed human understanding and shows us how AI can innovate every industry. So thank you very much. And Dr. Roma, please.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a really informative session. And thanks for discussing about machine learning and artificial intelligence. So I request the participants to please ask questions. You can put your questions in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself if you have any questions. Any questions from the audience? Yes, you can unmute yourself.
Hello, ma'am. May I ask a question?
Yes, sir, you can proceed.
Okay, so thank you for this beautiful and very informative talk. So I have a question that I have some data related to relative synonymous codon usage for the flaviviridae family. So I want to identify the dengue out of the whole flaviviridae family, and I have that RSCO values with me. So which method I should follow, you think, that in order to find out the particular dengue virus from the overall viral family?
Dr. Roma, can you please let me know the question, because I think the voice is
Basically, I have a set of data related to the flavivirus family. Okay, so flavivirus belongs to the dengue, Zika, and all those viruses comes under the flavivirus family. So I have that set of data with me. So in that, then that specific set of data, so I wanted, that's a huge set of data of the whole family, flavivirus family. In that, suppose I want to identify that particularly dengue. So now dengue has around some 3,000 to 4,000 different strains are there. So I have a whole set. So in that, some part I will use as a training set and some part I will use as a test set. So in that, the question is, what type of approach for a machine learning based identification, if I want to do, what kind of approach I should follow? Because flaviviridae family, they have multiple viruses. They have their own specific RSCU values. RSCU is basically nothing but the codon usage calculated against the background of human or the host. Okay, so that is a kind of a ratio that is calculated. So based on that, I'm little confused that what type of approach I should take in order to, by looking at the genome, by looking at those data, how can I, what type of approach I should take up in order to identify specifically, say this is this belongs to the dengue, this pattern. So something like that. Is there any? I mean,
So as I understand, because the voice was breaking, so if please let me know if I've interpreted your voice correctly, that you have this data set of maybe viruses or something, and you want to, with your data set that you have, you want to know what kind of machine learning application is to be used for that particular problem, right?
Yes.
So since the you were talking about 4 particular strains of dengue virus, right?
Yeah, no, it's basically I would mentioning about the overall total, the different types of strains which are there. The 4 types are the 4 serotypes. I'm talking about the overall, the total number of strains comes around 3 to 4,000. Okay. Total number of strains.
Yes. Okay. So since the strains are 3 to 4,000, I would have, and you want to classify, and your classification parameter has to be the strain. You want to identify the number of.
No, the classification parameter is a specific ratio that is called relative synonymous codon usage. So that's a ratio about the frequency of the codon usage in the host body, and that is human. So that is the ratio, that is the parameter based on which I want to classify. So the codon, every virus has a specific codon usage parameter in the human. So based on that, that is actually calculated. That is called RSCU, relative synonymous.
No, I understand. So based on RSC, you are trying to predict the strain of the virus. Is that what I?
Yes.
Dr. Subhamoy, I would suggest that rather, because not any biological parameter may be based upon only one property. Okay. So I would advise you to collect many more parameters, which may indirectly help in classification. This RSC could be one of the parameters. However, you may ask your students to collect as many parameters as possible, because I've been telling that higher is the number of parameters or attributes, higher is the chances of prediction, good prediction. Yep. Okay. So take up all the parameters that you believe could be even indirectly or minimally associated. Take all of those parameters and then ask the machine to learn on its own. So you probably apply the unsupervised learning so that you at least get those clustering of viruses on the basis of the parameters that you have obtained. And once those clusters are obtained, you would have some broad idea of the clustering or the similar association of these particular virus strains, and then probably you can go further and apply supervised learning to all those particular strains. But one rough idea should be based upon higher number of parameters, because machine learning would not happen with 1 or 2 parameters. It has to have hundreds of parameters altogether.
Okay, fine. So okay, fine, understood. Okay, fine. I'll find. I'll find.
Add more number of parameters to your data. Yes.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There is one question in the chat box.
Ma'am.
Yes.
Can AI be used to predict natural disasters?
Natural disasters, not that I'm aware of, but then since AI has reached the astronomical predictions, I'm sure natural disasters. Sharad, it is for you to explore and let me know, because this is not my domain. I work in the domain of healthcare. So please let me know if natural disasters are, if you're able to predict nothing like it, and then we can probably take a, an action before it really happens. So.
Yes, Naren,
ma'am. Ma'am. Roma ma'am, may I ask a question?
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. You can ask.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Professor Yasa ma'am. It is a wonderful session and we have learned a lot. I have 2 questions related to aging. First is aging is a multifactorial disease, and it has to involve so many SNPs which are which would be acting as a susceptible factors. Now, in order to predict accurately that one person is going to be susceptible to aging related diseases, what cutoff we should keep of the SNPs so that we accurately say, well, you are susceptible and then another person who is not meeting that cutoff value of SNPs, we can say, yeah, you can be relaxed. You do not need to worry.
So, Narendra, Dr. Narendra, if I may call you, I think
Yes, ma'am.
we are still into that particular, we are getting into that era of personalized medicine, or that is one area that we're getting into now, because now we have individual sequences. Till now we were talking about the data that I've taken also here. Till now we were talking about population genetics, wherein we were able to predict the ethnicity or a particular we believe that one particular population group behaves a certain way versus the other population group. But now having
Right,
now
ma'am.
having had the sequences of individuals also, now after this advent of 1000 Genome Project and everything, now we have individual sequences of all the individuals, and now sequencing is also very, very cheap. So you can get your own genome sequence at a reasonable cost of about $3,000 or so. So I think when we are entering into that era of individualized genetics, and we already have some idea of the predictive prediction tools, sorry, based on our knowledge of population parameters, we have already made tools based on population. I think when those tools are applied to individual people, that would that is the next era of individualized genomics or personalized genomics.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much.
There is one question by Dr. Rahul. Can we use AI in sensing devices like biosensors for cancer diagnosis?
Yes, in fact, this is AI has, it is finding a major application in biosensors and even in cancer diagnosis. You look at internet, it is full of it. I mean, every particular, all the cancers, I think, have already been predicted by one or the other machine learning classification algorithm, and also in biosensors. The oral cancers have already been detected with the way of AI. The only way is we have to now get on to development of those biosensing tools. Those predictive tools in hand, I think that is where we are yet to reach to. But then we have already reached the era of algorithms, and that has to be now only come in the form of a physical device. That is where we are. That is the current status.
Okay, ma'am. One more question.
Yes, one more question is there.
Yes, one question is there about which programming language you're using right now.
Oh, that's a very interesting problem. We use Python, and recently, Dr. Roma, we've also published a book on Python programming. I would send you the link myself, and it is essentially for the beginners who have not been using Python programming, because I saw many of my students running away from programming language because they thought programming always starts with those complex mathematical problems. But in our book that I've recently published, that starts from the very, very basics, and the examples that I've taken are also the biological examples that that are very simple to use. So I think that is where we can start with, and the Python is the language that we're using currently.
One more question is there, ma'am, and that is about what is the legal issues that may be faced by AI, using AI into healthcare.
Legal implications, I'm not really sure, though you may have ethical implications if you reveal the ethnicity of, because therefore all these, even the population studies, since the time they've been going on, there have been these apprehensions about legal and ethnic problems that may be there. However, in order to deal with such problems, when we enter the area of individualized genetics, and if you reveal in open that this particular individual is prone to that particular disorder, I think that would be one personal problem that should not be revealed. So that is often indicated in because if you're publishing a paper or something, you still have to, then you encode it, you code it. Like, for example, you give a particular code to a particular population or a particular individual, so that the individual or identity of the individual is not revealed. So I think that can be taken care of by that.
Any more question? One last question now. Okay, so thank you again, Yasha ma'am, for accepting my invitation and coming for this session. I would like to invite Vikas sir to please extend vote of thanks to ma'am.
if I'm audible.
Yes,
Hello?
yes.
Yeah. So, it's my pleasure right now presenting my thanks, and I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Professor ma'am that she has given us such a wonderful insight on this AI and machine learning. Really, it was wonderful lessons like based basis, and is such a kind of database which we can is really available, so we may also go and check it.
So I got disconnected. I guess he is having some connection issue. So I thank you so much, ma'am, on behalf of Department of Biotech, IILM. I would like to once again thank you for giving such a wonderful session. And it was really informative. And thank you again for accepting my invitation and coming up for such a session, because many of the participants, they are not from this background. So it will be good for all of us that they have gone through this machine learning basics and all. And definitely we'll go through the links which you have shared about your books and the chapters. So thank you again. And
Thank you, ma'am.
I would
Thank you
also
for
request you, ma'am, please share your PowerPoint. That will be beneficial for all the participants, because they'll be going for exam at the day end.
sure, sure.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
ma'am.
thank you, ma'am.
So all the participants, you can fill your attendance. I have shared the link, and we can just meet around at 12 o'clock for session number 2. Thank you.